problem today is we have so many people that are trying to review or repurpose history in the lens of what our morals and what our standards are today. And then therefore it's leading us in places we don't want to go.
So you've gone full circle, we'll say now, right? You go from a teacher, right, to TEDx speaker, author, podcast host. And at one point, just through the powers that be, become budget cuts. And that was the choice that you made to move into entrepreneurship. And you've done a ton of things since then. Successful business in 2010, grew into America's fastest growing private company before exiting in 2020. And now you share your knowledge, experience to the Exeter Club. You have a syndicated podcast, The Roots of All Success. But talking back to that feeling, you have a moment where you think you're going to be a teacher. You said before that you thought you're going to be a teacher forever. And then all of a sudden one day, here you are, your forever plan becomes a not forever plan. So what was that first decision or first thought at that moment?
Well, when I started teaching school, I didn't really know what I was getting into. I had no idea. I just knew that I wanted to go somewhere and do something where I could make a difference, make an impact on kids or on people's lives. And I chose to do it through teaching school. And taught for 4 years. I loved every minute of it. I was the best teacher in the county through test scores. My students performed better than anybody else. I was a model teacher. Other teachers would come and watch me teach. I had my license, I think history, physical education, although I never taught physical education. I did teach math, a couple classes of math, and I had my administrator's license. So I was on track. I never thought I would be not teaching. And it was April of 2011. My principal came to me and he said, "What was funny is I saw him in a restaurant the other day. I haven't seen him in a decade, maybe longer than that. And I saw him the other day, but he came to me and sat down and said, I got some bad news." I said, "What?" He goes, "Coming out of the Great Recession, we are having to make some budget cuts. And I have 2 positions. I can't keep those contracts on my budget for next school year." And as it turns out, I was the last guy hired. I didn't have tenure. It didn't matter that I was likely the best teacher in that building, if not, the county. He said that, "I won't be able to renew your contract." So I could finish the school year, but I wasn't coming back in August. That was a bad day. Mm-hmm. So I went home. On my way home that day after school, 3:30 or so, I went by my wife's office, which is not normal. I don't normally go see her. I normally just head on home, do whatever. So I walked in. She's like, "What are you doing here?" And I told her. And what I didn't know, of course, is she had had a terrible day. Unrelated. She had had a terrible day. And so that just compounded it. And so when she got home that night, it was a lot of tears and like, what the heck are we going to do? And the long story, very short, is I made a decision to start a company and I became an entrepreneur. Now I had started with the company that I committed to. I'd started a year before with a friend, but never intending that to be income. Like it was just something fun to do. So now I had to turn it into money.
When you were a teacher, having the best test scores, and this more is, I have a child who's 10, one who's 8, one who's 6. So they're in 5th grade. 8th grade is going to come real quick. To have an impact on kids in 8th grade, that's like that age where you're on that cusp of thinking you know everything, right? And so you don't want to listen to anyone, right? And so that's that age. So as a teacher, and it's probably really carries forward to that, have an impact with others, right? Be able to connect with them. The message translate. What was that thing that you were able to do to get them to really settle in with history, which to some can be the most fantastic subject, and to others could be, something that they don't want to hear anything about. What was that thing that you did that was able to connect and help them really get value out of it?
Well, what's interesting as you were describing kids in that age range, 13, 14-year-old kids, is really the last year that they are somewhat interested in what an adult thinks about them. And they don't feel like they're too cool for everybody. They feel cooler than most, but they still have this interest and they want to please an adult. And then by the time they become a freshman in high school, brain damage is fully set in and they don't care about anything. And they think they're better than everybody else and know more than everybody else. So I didn't want to teach high school for that reason. But you ask, what did I do? I don't know that it's any one thing that I did. I just think that it's a matter of attempting to truly connect and truly care for people. And in this case, a 13 or 14-year-old kid. Now, I taught school. The last year I taught school was in 2011. Cell phones weren't as ubiquitous as they are now. I think one student had a cell phone in my 8th grade class, one. And they were not allowed to use them at all in the building. It was illegal. They could not use cell phones. I don't know what I would do if I was a teacher today and had to deal with that mess. But so kids back then are different than they are today. I would connect with them. And as far as the history part goes, I just made it story time. It was story time with Mr. Duncan because history is just stories. And I told him, I said, there's 5 dates you need to remember. Like, you need to know July 4th, 1776. You got to know that date. As an American, you got to know it. But out of the 5 dates that they need to know, I said, I just want you to know things in order. So we're going to tell stories in order so you can understand what happened with early exploration with Columbus and what happened up to the Civil War is what I taught. So connecting with them and caring about them. I see so many teachers who don't care. They really are mailing it in. They just are there for a job and they treat it's like, I mean, you and I were in school at one point a long time ago, and our levels of coolness and influence in school, like everybody had a different level, right? There was the popular kids, there was the not popular kids. And a lot of teachers I found were probably in the lower end of that continuum. And now they're in a school building and they have all the influence and they wield it as such. And I never wanted to be that way.
When we moved here, in 2020, one of the big things for us moving is that, we had up in New Jersey, it was like romper room with like some days you're on Zoom. They're like the Zoom classes were like 7 minutes, and they were like 13 minutes. And like I had kids at the time, they're like, 2, 4, and 6. So they're on like Zoom and like you could just see the teachers. They were either defeated or just not fully, engaged. And that was that moment I was like, if there's a time we talk about moving, there's no better time than now. Because we want to get to a point, like get down to Tennessee, they could go back to school, they could be connected. And I mean, it's hard. You have kids for years that just didn't have that connection. I have a couple, my kids' cousins that I see that effect. They just weren't out with other kids. And so to lose that connection and now come back to school and you feel like foreign, and that you're going to see this. I don't know. You're going to see this in the next decades to come, like that people don't show up. Like I'm in a mastermind. There's a guy who's a headhunter there, and he will say that, kids who are going out for interviews, they'll be like for high position jobs will just no show. And they're walking into like a $250,000, $300,000 interview. And today they'll just no show, no communication, just not show. And he's like, it's not like 1 or 2. He's like, it's happening like 40 to 45% of the time where no matter how much prepare, I'll have like 7 conversations with them. And then out of nowhere, they'll just not show up. And I don't know if it's a point of just not feeling prepared or just not feeling connected or just not feeling confident. But you just like, you look at that and you say, well, that hurts, right? You feel a little bit lost. And with that, it like blurs the lines of just saying, okay, like what are we truly doing? And so you look at history, you have this point here where you go back to you as history and you look forward to what we're doing. What can we learn from history to today to really put ourselves in position to say, okay, let's not repeat what hasn't worked before.
Well, I think that's the main lesson that history teaches us, is that there were certain actions done by certain people in certain situations that led to certain outcomes. Okay, do you want that outcome? Well, then you probably should do the things in a certain way that they did. If you don't want that outcome, you probably shouldn't do it. The problem with today, and it's going to sound political, but it isn't. The problem with today is we have so many people that are trying to review or repurpose history in the lens of what our morals and what our standards are today. And then therefore it's leading us in places we don't want to go. So they look back and say, okay, slavery was bad. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. Everybody would say, yes, it was bad. And then they would say, well, today we can't do X because of that. Our standards are different today, like they're completely different. And I don't want to get into too many examples. This is not a political show, but then they say, okay, based on that, we have to go this way. And that's the whole thing you see with Columbus, being denigrated. We should just erase Columbus from the whole history because of what ended up happening with the indigenous people. You can't judge Columbus on the standards of today. It doesn't work that way. So kids need to understand that what we're talking about, I can't imagine teaching history today. I can't imagine being a teacher during COVID. I would have already been fired. I would have been on the news. I would not have been able to make it through that crap. But you can't judge Columbus on the standards of today in anticipation of a future that doesn't exist. You have to look at what they did with what they knew in those situations and where did it lead. That doesn't approve him of doing terrible things, but it certainly forgives the fact that he did stuff that we wouldn't do today because he had different standards. There were different things going on. So I think that's one thing, but I also believe that you have to look at what outcome do you want. History is a great teacher. If A plus B equaled C, then A plus B today is probably going to equal C. So if you want C, do A and B. That's probably how this works out. Same thing in business.
The danger with just so much information today is that you can just think about just trying to find like the actual truth of what's happening, right? But you think about that today, it's hard enough. But then you think about like 3, 4, 5, 6 decades from now, and it's just like the noise. There's so much noise out there that it's going to be hard to look back. Because like even if we go back further and further in history, we just have what was told through story, what was told in some part, what was written down. Those are what we have to read off history. Today, we have thousands of, opinions, thousands of perspectives, right? And thousands of views. And when you go forward into the future, think about how that's going to be compound and how you just try to get back to what actually happened today. I can't imagine, I can't fathom, because, you think about all the things we have today, you can't even imagine we're going to have into the future.
Yeah.
Right. So I think about when my kids, 35 years later, when they're my age, looking back and just saying, okay, well, I was there when I was 10. I remember what actually happened. And now today that's saying like this, I just it's a aside, but just trying to think about how we're going to view the future and view the past when we're that far into the future.
I think that's a wise perspective. You've got to look at the reality is history is written by the winners. I mean, the losers aren't around to write history. And you could say that's terrible and, we need the other side. Okay, we do. But it ain't terrible. That's just the way the world has always been. History is written by the winners. But that doesn't discount the fact that we need the voice of the people on the other side. There are bad things that have happened, win, lose, that we need to look at the perspective of what happened, because the history may ultimately say, well, the winners were actually the bad people in these situations. Okay, if we one day find that out, then we can go back and say, well, what did the other side think? So we need to record what's going on. We need to look at what's happening. That's why history is so important. I think we need to. You can look at that in business. You can look at finances. I think finances is a very interesting thing because people today don't have any financial literacy. Like if you look at it in terms of a spectrum, 100% is, everything there is to know about money. I mean, we're probably in the bottom 10% of what people actually know about money, the history of money, where it came from, how it's working. Well, if we want to have a better future financially, and you don't understand where money came from and how it works, that's going to be difficult. And so the winners of the money story is usually the federal government. And it's usually people that are in the top 1% of 1%. Okay, they are writing the history because they won. Well, that doesn't mean we can't go back and look at the other side. Well, where did this actually come? So one of my favorite books on finance is The Creature from Jekyll Island. Have you ever heard of this book?
I've heard it, but I've not.
Oh, everybody should go read this book. The Creature from Jekyll Island is a historical account, one person's perspective, but he did the research on what happened when the Federal Reserve was put in place in 1913, 1914. Okay, that is the other voice of the side of the winners, because the winners were the guys that put it together. I think there were, I can't remember the number, 6 guys who went down to Jekyll Island, South Carolina or Georgia. It was on the Atlantic coast, and they put together what ultimately became known as the Federal Reserve.
I believe those families were like 6 of the richest families.
Yes, yeah. And they were controlled most of the world's resources at that time, because there was all these different bankers and industrial magnates. And they came up with, okay, that was the winning story. The Federal Reserve became a thing, and here we are. We still have it today. But there's a side that we need to understand. That doesn't implicitly make the Federal Reserve bad, although I think it personally, I do. But that doesn't implicitly make it bad. It just makes us understand, okay, well, if this is how money works, I got to play the game, because that's the rules. So I have to play within the game. I got to play within those rules, and I can make differences. That's why you're in real estate. Like, there's a way to make money that doesn't require you to trade 40 hours of your life every week for a paycheck. You figure that out. Well, you're in a very small percentage of people that are able to do that. And not many people can do that. But you looked at it and said, oh, there's another way. And you figured it out. Had nobody ever done it before you, you probably wouldn't be doing it. There's very few people that figure out something brand new.
Yeah.
Like, Solomon said in Ecclesiastes thousands of years ago, there's nothing new under the sun. So there's very few things that we're going to find that, oh, this is new. But it's really a reapplication of things that have happened in the past. So, well, why don't we go look at that and go, can I apply that to real estate? Can I apply that to business? Can I apply that to money? How do I figure this out?
And I don't know in your field, but in my field, a lot people try to find the new. When in fact, you can just go back and repeat exactly what was done. And you use that and you say, okay, if I just go back and just repeat exactly what was done, I already have a backbone, a foundation for what stands upon what's worked in the past, is continuing to work today. Yet you'll see people get lost where they actually won't go take action because you're just trying to find that new thing. It's like, I'm trying to find a thing that's going to get me like 100x today or something, where I could just go and say, okay, if I just follow these steps. I remember, that was a part of NERS when we went to buy our first farming community. We brought a 94 unit back in 2017. And it was that point of like, just trying to find a new, but then all of a sudden saying, well, wait, that guy's doing this. So maybe I should just try those steps. And when I got that, it gave me confidence, because I already knew, like, I tried one step. I was like, okay, that's the step they did. It worked. And you do 2 steps. But we get lost in this world where you're constantly trying to find what to do. But if you just take the action, it actually gets you the results, right? So what actions did you take? Let's pivot a little bit back to you leaving as a school teacher, jumping into the business that you had started a year prior. But what actions did you start taking that started to give you the confidence to say, okay, you know what, we got something here?
So the business that we started in the spring of 2010, there was the name of the business was Future Vision Energy. And a friend of mine had convinced me to start that company with him. I had no intention of ever not being a school teacher. That's what I wanted to do. We had just moved into, at the time, what we thought would be our forever home. Life was good for us. I was a school teacher making $36,000 a year. My wife was making probably about the same. But back then, that provided a pretty good life. Bring back the good old days as far as I'm concerned. But we were living a decent life and things were good. And Bill came to me and said, hey, let's do this thing. I'm like, okay. So he wanted to design a hydrogen generator for cars, on-demand hydrogen generator. And he also wanted to build ethanol stills. It's like, okay, dude, I don't teach science. I don't know anything about this, but I'll be happy to work with you. So we did it. We got it working to where my son's go-kart would run off hydrogen that we created in the shed in my backyard. It was pretty cool. But the decisions that I made, so that's the question. So in spring of 2020 or 2011, when my principal said, hey man, you're not coming back in the fall, first decision, I'm going to go get a teaching job somewhere else. But there weren't any. They're like teaching positions were shut down. And the opportunities that were available, I was being beat out with people that had degrees at Harvard. I can't compete with that. My degree was at Lipscomb, which is a private school here in Nashville, great school. But if you're looking at two candidates, one's from Harvard, one's from Lipscomb, I'm probably losing. And so that was what happened. I couldn't get a job as a school teacher. So I thought, okay, I'm going to have to go in the corporate world. So I just go get a job. So I started applying for jobs. Interesting, you mentioned the headhunter guy in your mastermind, is that I went and worked with a recruiting company and about working as a headhunter for the recruiting company. They weren't recruiting me to work for another company. They were recruiting me to work for them. But I hadn't made the decision, am I going to do something with this business or am I going to go to corporate world? I was straddling the fence. And what I now know is that the pain of indecision is worse than the pain of a bad decision. And so I didn't make a decision. And so
So call to that a little.
The pain of indecision is worse than the pain of a bad decision. Indecision is the worst. It causes so much stress in our lives. It's the praying for what we don't want. That's called worry. When you worry, you're praying for what you don't want. And in this moment of, or weeks in my case, of indecision, you haven't made a decision. What, should I do this or do that? And you're trying to figure out the perfect way. That pain is worse than if you just made a decision at the beginning. Let's say it turned out to be the wrong one. Okay, that's painful for a moment, maybe in for a couple of weeks, but you could fix it. But the pain of indecision lives with you forever. You take it to the pillow every night. It kills you. It's worry. It's stress. And so what I was living is this indecisiveness. And the guy interviewing me for this headhunter position, I'd interviewed with him probably 3 or 4 times. And every time he would call me back in, I would put him off for a couple of weeks. Hey, I've got some stuff going on. Can I come in a couple of weeks? And the first 2 times he was okay with it. Third time he's like, Jason, I don't think you're interested in this position, so we formally withdraw our interest. Well, that was the force I needed to push me to make the right decision. So I made the decision to go full in with the company, but I wasn't going to do hydrogen and ethanol. So I went to Bill and said, look, man, this hydrogen and ethanol thing, they ain't going to make any money. I think we need to take it and like pivot this into some other alternative energy conservation rather than creating energy. Let's conserve energy. And I looked at LED lighting at the time for commercial applications, was brand new. And I said, this is going to be the next big wave. Let's do this.
Why'd you think it was going to be the next big wave?
Well, as it turns out, I was right. I mean, everywhere's LED. There are LEDs everywhere. But I just thought this is going to be a big thing. All these huge hospitals, warehouses, manufacturing facilities have these 400-watt metal halide. They got all these T12 fluorescent lights. They consume gobs of energy. 90% of the energy consumption is just turned into heat. Only 10% is turned into light. LEDs are the opposite. 90% of the energy consumed puts out light, only 10% puts out heat. So it's going to be great for if you're, the environmentalist, it's going to be great for the environment. It's going to be great for your pocketbooks. It will save you tons of money. And I just knew it was going to work. Bill disagreed with me. So we separated. He took the hydrogen and ethanol and, went off on his own thing. And I retooled the whole company to do LED lighting retrofits. So when I told my wife, I said, look, here's the thing. August the 15th is my last paycheck from the state. And I probably made this decision in June because April, that like 2010, this is 11, it was 2011. So my principal comes to me in April. So I probably make this decision in June and I've gotten until August. So I've got I don't know, probably 2 paychecks left, July and August. And I tell my wife, I said, look, if I don't make a deal. If I don't get some money coming in, I'll go get a real job. I'll go work at Lowe's or I'll go work at Starbucks. I'll do something to make some money. On August the 12th, I walked into the hospital boardroom at a regional hospital here in Middle Tennessee.
Just a cold walk.
No. We had been working with them for a month or so, 6 weeks. And this was the pitch. This was the final, like, here's the project. Here's how much it's going to cost. And the story is amazing. So we're sitting at this conference room table, and I'm on this side of the table at the very end, kind of like we're at this table now. And the VP of Finance and Facilities is sitting across from me. The VP of Facilities, not Finance, sitting across from me. But the table was probably double the width of this. So he's pretty far away from me. And I have my 11-inch white MacBook. Remember those? It was sitting in the middle of the table, not connected to the screen because I didn't know how to connect it. And I'm leaning over and clicking the space bar to go through slides. And the guy next to him is the engineer for the hospital. He's the guy I had been working with this whole time. And then 2 feet down from him is the CFO of the hospital. And then next to me is my business partner. And I'm pitching. I'm pitching.
And it's a new business partner, so different business.
Yeah, so it's a new guy I brought in when I knew I was going to go this direction.
Yeah.
He actually knew the CFO at the hospital. That's how we were introduced to the hospital. So I'm going through this, and the guy sitting in your position, the VP, he looks at me, and about halfway, or about 2/3 of the way through the presentation, he says, "Can I ask you a question?" I said, "Sure." He goes, "Why wouldn't I do this?" And because the issue was, we were going to save him X number of dollars. It was like $280,000 a year in his energy bills. And it was going to cost less than that annually for the next 5 years to do the project. Why wouldn't I do this? And I said, I don't know. Why wouldn't you? Then he looked at me again. He said, has anybody ever told you no? So I said, no, sir, they haven't. Now, I didn't tell him he's the first guy I asked. And then he looks down at the CFO who knows my business partner, and he knows this. And he says, do you trust these guys? And he said, yes, I trust him. And so he looked at me again, and then he looked back at the CFO and said, write the man a check. I didn't even finish the presentation. And that turned out to be a $2.3 million project. It took 3 years to complete. And it wasn't $2.3 million up front. I think the first check they wrote me was $18,000, and it was just enough to kind of get us started on the project. And then the first big check was $626,000. Still have a copy of that check. Biggest check at that time that I ever received. I mean, not just ever received it, that had not even just zeros on it. I was a school teacher, for goodness sake, making $38,000 a year. So that was a big day.
Yeah, and I mean, that's like 18 years.
Oh, yeah. Crazy. Hey, of course, that wasn't all my money. I had to buy products with it
in terms of seeing that chip,
but it was a lot of money. It was a lot of money.
They already had their mind made up when you walked in. So you almost have to convince them. Like, I'm sure you've been in meetings before. You know the result before the meeting starts, and it's almost that they have to some way have a massive pivot for them to come out there. So they're just trying to find the reason, like, this seems so logical. Like, tell me how I say no. But there's really no way. And you think about it at that point, there's lots of things that, today seem obvious. It's absolutely obvious. But at that time, it was like, it's just not clear. So what did that do as a stepping stone? Where do you go next?
Well, so that proved concept. And I think anybody in sales, real estate investing, whatever it happens to be, coaching, like I'm a business coach now. So anything you're doing, proof of concept happens with the first person who pays you money for whatever it is you're trying to do. So if you're trying to sell a widget and you've worked 2 or 3 years selling that widget and nobody's buying it from you, it ain't gonna work. But if one person other than your mom buys the widget, it's a proof of concept, like this will work. So now it's, how do I get 2 people to buy? How do we get 3 people? So we had one major deal on the books, and it was a proof of concept. And now we know, okay, we can do this. And that boost of confidence that it gave us allowed me to parlay that into other bigger deals. So there's a large distribution center in Gallatin, Tennessee. It is a clothing company that we would all know. I'm not going to say the name. They're on TV all the time. They've been around for years. They had 2.8 million square feet. I think it was millions of square feet in our town. And I lived in Gallatin at the time. And I was literally driving by one day and kind of saw it. And I thought, I bet they got a lot of lights. And I cold called. I just Googled while I was at a red light the name of their company, and they don't have a phone number listed, but about 6 pages in Google, there was a phone number attached with the name of their company. And I just clicked on it, called, and the guy who answered said, IT. And that's how he answered the phone. So I'd figure I'd found an internal line somehow. And I said, you're going to think this is nuts. I said, but I live here in Gallatin, and I'm just curious, what's your electric bill every month? It's got to be huge. And he hangs up, which
C plus.
Yeah, C plus. So I, in my brain, he was one of 50 people in the IT department, or at least a lot of people in the IT department. So I just called right back. And I did get a different guy, but it was the other guy. I eventually found out there's only two guys in the IT department. So the other guy, and I go to both.
You were sitting far enough.
Yeah. So I did the same spiel, and he goes, hang on a minute. He puts me on hold for probably 3 minutes. And I think he's not coming back. But I stood on the phone. And he goes, and he comes back, he says, you need to call, I don't remember her name, we'll say Carol. You need to call Carol in finance. Here's her phone number. He gives me the phone number. I call Carol, and I do what you're not supposed to do in sales. I leave a sales pitch on a voicemail cold. Okay. I thought, what have I got to lose? So I called Carol, left a voicemail. I said, you're going to think this is nuts. And I didn't tell her I was trying to sell anything. I just said, I'm asking about your electric bill. I live here in the blah, blah, blah. And 2 weeks passed, dude. I'd forgotten I'd made the phone call. But the confidence that pitch made gave me the confidence to do something silly, like calling this international company. 2 weeks pass, and I get a phone call out of the blue from a guy named Eric. And Eric introduces himself, and he says, hey, I'm with, and he tells me the name of the company. And he says, I understand you have some questions about our electric bill. What can I help you with? And at that point, I felt like I'm just going to tell him why I was calling. I said, I own this company. I do this. I can help you with your electric bill. I do lighting. Would you be interested in having a conversation? He goes, sure, come on in. We ended up doing millions of dollars with them. We did their entire facility here in Tennessee. We did a facility in New York. They have a facility in California. We did a facility in, I think, Ohio. And it was millions of dollars off of a confidence building opportunity I had at the hospital that turned into, well, I'm going to call this guy and I'm going to call this guy. And we became, at the time, one of the fastest growing privately held companies in the country. We were doing millions of dollars in revenue. We had a 7-figure bottom line. We were killing it. Things were going well. Now that doesn't mean it wasn't without problems. We had a lot of problems. We had, vendor issues. We had financing issues with some clients, et cetera. But it was an amazing run. It was an amazing run. We did more hospitals than any private company in the country at the time when we were doing it.
What's so interesting is that, you look at a lot of future results, and it's usually two ways. Right? Someone tells you no, and you just stop. Or someone says no, or just hangs up on you. And you say, okay, well, I'm just find someone else to ask. And you just keep asking that question and carrying it forward, right? And I could think of just multiple times that you see that first no. And when I was young, that would have been it. I'd be like, oh, okay, guess go on something else, right? But you keep going, and you get the different outcome. You don't know where it's going to go, but it keeps carrying you forward. And it's the same thing here, right? You got that confidence, but even without that confidence, you're still making that call, right? But it's the will and the ability to just pick up the phone again when the first guy says no, or the first go, just hangs up on you or just yells at you. Yeah. And you say, okay, well, maybe she just doesn't know. Because usually the other end, they're not always the right person, right? So maybe they're saying no because it's the easiest, or they don't know, or they don't want to deal with you, or, they have some other conflicting interests in there. And so if you think about that, okay, well, let me just try someone else. And maybe they have a better interest for me, or a better answer for me, or a better result for me. And usually you just keep asking the right question. You're eventually going to get the right person who, like that guy who picked up the phone and called you back, has the right answer, right? And sees the value.
Yeah.
Right. And that's a lot of with life is if you just keep doing that a little bit more, you don't know what the results are, but usually, we think the outcome, right? I think if I make this call, the outcome could be the worst thing possible. So I just won't do it. And it gets back to the, being stuck and not actually making a choice, even if and making a wrong choice could be the better choice, right? And we get so worried, and worry, that's like the silent killer, right? You can worry yourself to death.
Yeah.
And where do you go? Nothing comes back from it.
Confidence is the memory of success. So if we're going to be confident, if we want to be confident, we got to build little successes. So I wouldn't have been as confident making that phone call to an international company had I not had some previous success. And by the way, the hospital wasn't I didn't do the hospital and immediately call this big company. It was, we did the hospital, and then I had another little job that we won, and another little job that we won, and we started building. It's let me just call this. So confidence is a memory of success. So if we need to think about and celebrate our successes. And I know some people have a harder time than that with that than others, but I think we need to stop for a minute. In my mastermind that I lead, the Exeter Club, one of the things that we do, not every single time, but most of our meetings, we go around the horn and share our biggest wins that we've had in the last couple of weeks. Because as entrepreneurs, we're getting beat up a lot. We got wrong, we're doing a lot. You don't get around other people because usually you're not sure, right? You've come from a teaching background. I don't know what your family did, but you're probably not around a lot of entrepreneurs when you started. So most people don't understand, right? And you go talk to them wait, what are you doing? Right. And it's just so uncertain. Wait, you don't have a job? So
you're just hokey. Like you just can't have that conversation, right? Because they just don't get it, right? And so you get around people, right? You have to talk about that because you just don't have that energy from other people that are in the same direction saying, I don't know how, but I'm going to figure it out.
Yeah. And we get beat up a lot. We're alone. And so getting together as our group, we share wins. And I want to hear you. What's the biggest win you've had in the last 2 weeks? It could be family, it could be money, it could be business. And sometimes it'll be a family thing. One guy will say, well, my daughter did something, blah, blah. It was amazing. Or this happened. Or my wife and I did this, or we just celebrated this. But then it could be, hey, I just closed a $10 million deal, or I closed this deal, or I did this, or I just hired my first COO, or I just hired my first assistant. I mean, we need to celebrate those wins because that success, those wins, the memories of those things build confidence.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've gone full circle, we'll say now, right? You go from a teacher, right? Mm-hmm. Back to the business you exited in 2020, right?
Yeah.
What was the choice to exit? What was it? Business has grown to the part you were. What was the choice to move on from the business?
Well, that's a whole different story. So in 2017, I hired a business coach for the very first time. I didn't even know they existed. So I hired a business coach, and things started really changing in the business for the better. Started making money. We got better. I think business coaches are vital to anybody running a company, and things were going really well. And I think it was in late 2018, very early 2019, I had a conversation with my business coach about the future. What should we do here? And as it turned, at the end of that conversation was, let's sell the company. We had a 7-figure bottom line. We were doing really well. Let's sell it. It's probably worth a lot of money. And his response was unexpected. He said, it's not worth anything. I said, what do you mean it's not worth anything? He said, the very reason you don't want to run it is the same reason nobody will want to buy it. He said, you got a lot of money coming in, but everything's relied upon you. And he said, you're not going to be able to sell it. And I thought, well,
explain why, because some people might not understand that concept, but talk to why. Yeah, that's what makes it a bit.
Well, if I'm an investor and I want to go buy a business as an investment, and I find out that the CEO, owner of the business, works 50 hours a week, and it's the sweat of his brow that keeps this thing running, he has to stay with when I buy it, he has to stay. So I have to buy the business and him. He's got to stay. So what does that mean? Well, there's a lot of risk. Like, this business doesn't run without this human. If this human gets hit by a bus, if this human decides to move to, Bangladesh, I'm out. Like, I've lost this business because of this dude. So I'm going to pay 30 to 50% less for that acquisition. Same thing when you're buying apartment complexes. If there's no management team and you're like, I have to take rent, I got to screen tenants, I got to manage the landscaping, you're going to pay a lot less because you got to replace all that with somebody else. So businesses have to run by themselves. That's what I discovered. I didn't know that. Nobody had ever said anything to me like that. So for the next 18 months, I doubled down on, well, what can I do to get the business run without me? And I started working towards that. And ultimately, I made the decision not to sell the company, but to hold on to the company, but not have anything to do with daily operations. And I refer to that as exit without exiting. And so people ask, did you exit the business? Literally, I moved my office out. I had no office in the building. My employees I met with once a month. I didn't, my leadership team. And people asked, well, did you sell it? I said, no, I didn't sell it, but I exited. I just didn't exit. And that's how the phrase exit without exiting kind of was born. And then ultimately I ended up writing a book called Exit Without Exiting, kind of telling the story. So that was how I made that decision.
You probably just put the fear of life into a lot of business owners out there who just can't think of the business operating without them in it, right? Because they think that the second they step out of it, right? Because you've been in business before and you were doing this for up to 2018, where you probably, like, if you are away for a day or you're at your kid's event or you're like going on vacation, you're just like thinking like you're all over your phone, you're all over this point because the business is just going to collapse without you, right? And so when you start pulling yourself out of the business, like, it's the same thing. You get that little bit of confidence, right? You find someone else who can fill this one part, or maybe you can fill more part, maybe you can fill some of it, and the business still does something the next day. And then the next day, something happens again without you. And all of a sudden you look at it, you say, well, that was the whole point of starting this business, right? Is creating a life that I want. And that's what, Live 100 talks a lot to really just getting back to a life that you truly want to live. And the big part for that is that it's great to grow a big business. It's great to do a lot. But if you're so busy doing the business and you miss out on life, then you look back and you say, well, why was I doing the business? Just to get back to the life I want. Yep. Right. And so now I'll get back to the full circle thing. You've gone from teacher to, business owner. It seems still business owner today, but back to teacher. Right?
Yeah.
How do you lose the lessons from day one now into today?
Well, what's interesting is that we haven't talked about this, but for 13 years before I became a teacher, I was a pastor. So I did pastoral ministry for a long time and then got sick of doing that. That's why I decided to start teaching. I got to take this energy that I had to help people and teach into a different avenue. So that's why I went to become a school teacher. And then we've already talked about why I left school teaching to become a business owner. So I became a business owner. And then when I exited, it might seem like a natural step now. It's like, oh, well, just go teach people how to do what you did. I didn't know that's what I was going to do. I went through about a 4-month identity crisis when I was not the CEO and president of my company. I didn't know what the heck I was. I didn't carry business cards around. I introduced myself as that. And so I had a mentor and coach at the time. We met every single week just to kind of figure out, get my head right, because it was this, I'd built an identity in this business for a decade and I didn't know how to introduce myself anymore. I didn't know how to show up. And it was him who kind of helped me understand, okay, teaching is your thing. Leadership is your thing. So you got to figure out how to use those gifts. And maybe it is going back to teaching school because you've got money coming in from the business. You don't need the money from teaching, and so I thought about that. And I had a couple of friends who'd reached out to me and asked me to help them with their businesses. So I helped a guy launch a business. I helped another guy kind of expand a business. And I thought, I actually enjoyed this. This is fun. So maybe I should just coach. Maybe that's what I should do because I'd had a business coach. Maybe I should just go into coaching full time. And that's what ultimately happened. But even though I did that, it still didn't seem like that's what I should be doing. It was natural and it was enjoyable. So I attempted and I started so many other companies. I think I started 5 or 6 companies in 1 year, just thinking, oh, yeah. They say on Instagram, the average millionaire has 7 sources of income. So I got to go do that. Well, what they don't tell you is you need to get the first one locked before you go to this other crap.
The biggest piece is that you look at this and like everybody's who like very famous who have multiple businesses, but they all started with 1.
Exactly.
Right. And when you do this and you try to get 7, right, you're going to get beat by the person that's doing 1 and every time. Right. And that's why I try to talk about real estate. Like if I'm trying to invest all over the country, I'm just going to get beat out in every city by the guy who's just investing in that city.
Yep.
It's the same thing at any level.
Oh, I lost hundreds of thousands of dollars in pursuit of my 7 sources of income. I started a hard money lending company. I started a real estate investing company. I started an Amazon store. I started a YouTube channel. I started all these different companies and almost all of them failed. Almost all of them lost money. Almost all of them were a drain on our family finances. So that was a terrible, terrible thing. And I was tempted, well, maybe I should just acquire a business. I love to ride motorcycles. I'm a very big motorcycle fan. So I looked at buying a couple of motorcycle dealerships and chased one down to where the price didn't make sense. So I backed out, chased another one all the way down to the end of financing. And there was a financing thing that kind of screwed it up. And I could have probably pushed through, but I got a little cold feet, said, I'm not going to do it. So I pulled that. And then last year, just as late as last summer, I made an offer to buy a dealership, car dealership and an RV dealership. And I was going to do that. And I don't know, dude, it was last summer. I think it was in June, July last summer. I had this awakening of understanding what I always teach my clients is focus. Follow one course until successful. So focus stands for follow one course until successful. And I'd been teaching this and I wasn't doing it. And I thought, my mastermind is doing okay, but it ain't killing it. I said, I just need to double down on this. But I was in the middle. I had an LOI already issued on this. We'd already been negotiating price. And so I made the decision to focus on the mastermind only. So I couldn't withdraw my offer because that would be no integrity. So he had an offer on his desk for this dealership. And I just went back to him and I said, look, here's the deal. The offer you have in your hand is the last and final offer I will make. There will be no negotiation. If you don't accept that, we're done. And I have to hear from you by the 31st of July. And if I don't, I will assume you don't want to do it. He didn't get back to me until the 31st. Now, he did get back sometime in the middle of August, but it was too late. I already made the decision. So I doubled down. Well, between that day and the end of the year last year, we nearly tripled the membership of the mastermind, the power of focus. So for me, it was July until the end of the year that I realized that God put me on this planet to use my gifts of teaching and leadership and service of others and to enjoy this life that he's given me. And how do I best do that? I'm a coach. I don't need to own a dealership. Now I want to, and I will do that at some point, but not until I get this one locked. Because as good as we're doing, we haven't hit the revenue that I need. I do have enough money to pay my bills, but I haven't hit it that I want. Like there's a certain dollar amount per month that I want in recurring revenue. Haven't hit that yet. Well, as soon as I hit it, buddy, I'm going to go buy something. I'm going to go buy like an apartment complex. I'm going to buy a dealership. I'm going to do something. But right now, everything's on lockdown. Like your partner, Dustin, has reached out to me just last week and said, hey, man, I got this deal. And they're like, nope. Like, I'm focused. I'll be happy to listen and I'll pass it along to other people, which, by the way, I do have somebody who's interested. So don't let me forget. I almost forgot about that. So I'll talk to Dustin about it too. But I'm not doing anything until I get this through. And I think I could be there. If not by the end of the year, certainly first of next year, I'll be there.
It's amazing when you follow one course of action until it's successful.
Yes.
What shows up.
You get what you want.
I think that's a great place to leave it with today, man. Jason, I'm sorry. It should be very here. These were
same name.
But you know what? It's been great. I mean, I learn a ton to do these podcasts always, right? But even sometimes it's just really putting the message back in there that like, there's nothing more important than focus. And I've gotten back to the mind becomes weak when we just let distractions in. They're constantly distracted. And in time of age, right? Your kids, my kids, even today, like we're just constantly trying to be distracted.
Yeah.
And when you can just say no, right? We think we're limiting the opportunity, but as you can see, 3 times, the growth in just a very short time, right? Where focus can just lead you to. So congrats on all your success.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. If people want to learn more, reach out to you. If you're here in Middle Tennessee, you have a mastermind, some other things, you have a podcast, Roots of All Success, where else should they find you?
Anywhere you go to The Real Jason Duncan. So if you Google The Real Jason Duncan, you're going to find me, therealjasonduncan.com. I'm on Instagram, The Real Jason Duncan, YouTube, The Real Jason Duncan. Just go look up The Real Jason Duncan. You're going to find me.
Jason, this is awesome. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.